We try to really operate business that way, and it can be tough though in the real estate industry to always be finding a win-win, but that really is what we try to accomplish.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you are getting some great value from our guests, we want to hear about it. Leave us an honest feedback, rating, and review. Tell us what you love about the show or anything we can do to make this show work harder for your investing goals. It helps us, but it also helps other listeners find the value they're looking for so they can scale their portfolio. And listen, if you haven't done so or this is your first time listening, be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we've got a great show with another Midwest kid. We're going to be talking to Dale R. Wills. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button today. Dale Wills is an experienced real estate developer who has been involved in the industry for more than 25 years. Now, he is the owner and founder of Centra Companies, and since 2011, he has overseen the development of over 15,000 homes across 50 total projects worth more than $500 million in project value. Let's welcome to the show, Dale Wills.
John, excited to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Dale. You're out there in Minnesota. I'm out here in Cincinnati, so we got that Midwest connection thing going. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background. Why don't you take 2 minutes and give us more context?
Yeah, I grew up in Northern California, and that's where I met my wife and did a little bit of construction there. Had the opportunity to go to Nevada, lived there for a few years doing banking, did some construction, development lending, some mortgage lending. And that's really where I sunk my teeth into the industry. From there, we spent about 9 years in the Utah market, and that was a lot of fun. We did some banking there as well, owned my own home building company, and then worked for a company that created a city from scratch, which was pretty exciting because we had to put the sewer system in, we had to put the water company in, a golf course, all the commercial, the master plan. That was a lot of fun and a really good learning experience. Then I went to work for a national home builder, and they asked me to go to the Minneapolis market for a period of time. And being a West Coast boy, I said, well, 3 years max. I don't want to stay out there. And that was 18 years ago. And we've really grown to love the Midwest and all it has to offer. And so in 2010, the market fell apart. And in 2010, I said, well, I'm going to go out on my own. And Minnesota's been really good to us. So we're going to stay here. Our family's happy. And that's when we started Centra Companies. And that really, the company started working through bank assets. Back in 2010, 11, 12, the banks owned a lot of assets they needed to figure out solutions for. And so we worked with them to develop land, to finish buildings that were partially done. And really, that's what launched the company, working through those. And then in time, those assets all dried up. We worked through them all, and then we started developing land, raw land, and building our own subdivisions.
Yeah, man, you talk about being a West Coast kid and kind of growing up there and then basically being adopted by the Midwest once you moved to Minnesota. And really that 2010 time frame where you're working for that large national developer, times obviously tough, went out on your own and launched Central Companies, starting with those bank-owned assets and then eventually moving more into development. For your background, when you were, at the very beginning stages of launching Centra, were you doing kind of development work? Was it more finance? Like what exactly was your background or expertise?
Just immediately before starting Centra, I was working for a national home builder. And so we would buy raw ground, we would develop it, put all the streets, the infrastructure in, get the entitlements, design the home product and build those homes. And that was a tough business to be in. When we were doing that, because there just wasn't a lot of people buying houses. And so that was what I was doing immediately, and then transitioned into Centra, and then did similar, but really working with banks to help them work through all their assets that were distressed that they had foreclosed on.
Got it. So were you wearing all those hats, kind of managing the project when you were working for that developer?
No, we had it, as a company, we had 850 employees at that point. And so my role really was an administrative role and coordinating, making sure everything came together and worked.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to understand is, I think when people get into real estate, the thing I always love about real estate is it doesn't matter what your background is. There's a role in real estate for that background, assuming it's in some level of professional services, right? So I come from marketing and, was able to kind of transition into the commercial real estate world and raising capital and working with investors and syndication and stuff like that, right? Marketing, branding, all those things. You come from the working for a larger developer. So you're in the industry, you've got the technical aspect of it. You were more in an administrative role. So it's interesting to hear how you're able to take kind of that experience, even though you weren't necessarily wearing every hat, but you were able to take the knowledge you were able to gain and transition into launching your own firm. Can you just talk about that transition period, maybe what you learned from working for that provider and then ultimately not provider, but working for that developer, and then what you were able to do to transition into your own company?
Yeah, really great question because it was an interesting, kind of a perfect storm for me. I had some banking background, understood that industry a little bit. The company I was with ended up filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They were forced into it in 2008. And so we went through that process of identifying all of the assets, having to claim certain things to the bankruptcy court. And so there was not only were we an ongoing operation of developing land, building houses, we also went through this bankruptcy, which is not very fun for anybody to be involved in, but it really gave me an education. And, and so once I was ready to go out on my own and say, hey, I've worked for myself more than I've worked for somebody, and this really isn't a lot of fun. I'm not having any fun anymore, and I want to go do something fun. So I said, well, I'm going to start my own. And so it was the perfect storm in that a lot of the assets are owned by banks. And I've got some banking background that I had worked in banks off and on in my career. I also understand real estate development because I was in the administrative side of it, the technical side of, how do we acquire the land? How do we get it developed? How do we make sure we have the right product? What is the consumer looking for? What are we going to build? So having that perfect storm, I was able to go into the banks and say, hey, it was actually the first bank we worked with. They called us, said, we've got these assets. You've had some success where you were at. You want to buy them? And I'm like, I don't know. That wasn't really a lot of fun. And they said, well, let's meet. And we ended up meeting. And I said, there's a lot of ways we can look at it. But right now, assets are so distressed. We would have to buy your lots for, $5,000 a lot. They're just not worth anything. In context, those same lots today sell for 70, 80,000 a piece. So they could buy them for 5,000, or we can go in and work out a deal where you provide some of the funding. We carry this together and we could succeed together. And they said, well, let's do it together. And so we started doing that together, and they had product, they had buildings, commercial buildings, homes that were partially finished. We go in and help them finish that, reposition them and sell them. Uh, Subdivisions that were partially developed, so they had some of the pipe work in. We'd finish the pipe work, put the roads in, design a product that would sell. So it was the perfect storm because having the banking experience, having the development experience, having the home building experience, put those all together, and it worked really well. And it was interesting. At one point, the all banks get regular audits, to make sure they're sound and protecting the depositors. They had their routine audit, and the auditor said, "Hey, why are these still considered distressed assets? They're a performing asset with what you're doing with Centra." Like, well, we'd foreclosed on them and they're still on our books. They said, no, you can make them performing. Well, the way they have to set non-performing assets aside and the cash they have to put aside is pretty significant. That immediately put millions of dollars to their bottom line they could go out and invest. Once that happened, word got out on the street. We had banks calling us every day saying, "Hey, can you do this with us?" And that's a lot of fun when people are calling you saying, "You come up with something pretty creative. Let's do it together."
I love it, man. You gave some great insight, right? One, just hearing your story and the context of it is very helpful. But beyond that, I want to dig into some of the nuances of what you said because I think some of it may have went over our listeners' head, right? So from your story, you had a banking background, you had a background working in development, working for that developer. You found this opportunity working with the banks to come into some of their owned assets, and you were able to reposition them to partner with them and bring them to be performing assets. And that actually allowed them to free up a lot of capital where the banks could now reinvest that capital. Here are two takeaways I want our listeners to get though. The first one is most of us have a competitive advantage. Even if we don't have the experience and a track record of doing whatever the thing is that we're trying to do, if you look at your background, your expertise, the relationships you have, there's some competitive advantage. For you, you had been in the banking, so you understood that world. You understood the way they think. You understood the way they ran their books. You had been a developer, so you understood how that company operated. Even though you weren't the lead developer yourself or the contractor or whatever, you were close enough to that space to understand how things worked and what you needed to get it at to run some basic numbers. And then putting that together, you were able to create value that maybe other investors would have missed or wouldn't have been able to create. The second thing is, and you said this kind of quick, but you looked at those deals and you went to the bank and said, for what they're where they're at now, I would have to buy them for 5,000 a lot, or we could partner together. And that is a great framework for negotiating. You know, give two solutions. One is a straight offer. Hey, you're selling this house. Here's how much I think it's worth based on what I got to do for it, right? It's probably going to be a way lower than what that person wants. But then you can give a creative offer. And in that case, you said, or we could partner together. Here's what I get it for. Here are the kind of terms I need. And now we can kind of work together over the next 3, 5, whatever amount of years. In that way, you're offering up two solutions. One is straightforward, so it's not this guesswork. Hey, you want 50,000? I think it's worth 10. Or I can give you 50, but I can only give you that 50 5 years from now. I'll give you 10 today. We partner together. Here are the terms I need. I'm going to go and make XYZ. You're going to get your 50 at the end of 5 years, right? So I love that approach and framework to say, hey, I'm going to give you a straight offer or I'm going to give you a creative offer. And it's just a good way of thinking about how to approach people when you have a real opportunity, but maybe you're a little bit off on where you see the value versus where that owner or that bank sees the value today. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love Stephen Covey's book, the 7 Habits. I don't know, I think it's the fifth or sixth habit that's, the win-win. And, I don't particularly love real estate negotiations when you're going in and browbeating each other of, I need you to cut your price another 10%. And so, I think that principle really applies to that of, we tried to find a solution that how does the bank win and not take a bath on these? And at the same time, how can we win? And, we try to really operate business that way. And it can be tough though in the real estate industry to always be finding a win-win, but that really is what we try to accomplish.
Well, you talked about creating that win-win. Obviously, you're able to do that with that bank. You had other banks calling you, and fast forward, you create kind of this massive portfolio, doing over $500 million worth of developments and projects. Talk to me about scaling that business because I mean, you started this with yourself. Sounds like you and had these conversations with your wife, and as you were scaling this business, clearly it takes a lot of different people, roles, hats, responsibilities. What are some of the things you learned along the way that helped you be successful?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in our mindset. And I'm a believer in you become the average of your peer group. And I'll say to young people, where envision where do you want to be 10, 15 years from now? And they get a picture in their mind. You say, okay, well, how many people do you regularly associate with that are where you want to be? And if they ever even say one, you say, well, your dreams aren't big enough. Because if you have big dreams where you want to be at your age 40 and you're 25, I'm sorry. Those people aren't associating with you. Well, what do you do about it? If you're the average of your peer group, you've got to continue to educate yourself and create your own peer group. This podcast is a perfect example of creating your own peer group. Listen to this podcast. You're hearing to big thinkers. You're hearing to people that have big dreams, have big aspirations that have been there and done that. That's how you create your peer group. You say, I'm going to listen to podcasts. I'm going to read books. I'm going to do things that people have been there, and that becomes my peer group. Because the reality is, if I've got big dreams, it doesn't matter how old I am. until you get to a certain point in life, I've been really fortunate. I'm at a point in life now that I'm regularly associate with people that are bigger dreamers and have done bigger things than I have. But for most of my life, that wasn't possible. And and so that's really what I've done. Podcasts are an amazing way to create that peer group. Before podcasts existed, it was really reading was your primary source. And so I'm a big believer in you will find in life what you're looking for. And eh, I don't care what the economy's doing, there's opportunities. There's always opportunities to do deals. It's just what are you looking for? And if the economy's bad and you see it's bad, all you're going to see is bad. But if you say, "Hey, the economy's bad, let me go find where the opportunity is that everybody else is missing," you're going to find them. And so I just it's so important that you've got to be working on what are your belief systems, what is your mindset. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter if your belief systems are true or not. It's just that they provide you value. When I started Centra Companies, my belief system was I was unemployable. There was hundreds of people that were more qualified than I was to take jobs. And so my belief was I was unemployable, and the only way I'm going to feed my family is go start my own thing again. I don't know if that was true. I don't really care because it served me really well, believing nobody would hire me. And so just make sure you have a belief system that's empowering and is going to help you grow. And you've got to constantly reinforce that. You know, People that are listening to this podcast aren't surrounded by a lot of people that are like, you can do it. Unfortunately, we're surrounded by a lot of people. Well, why would you want to take that risk? So surround yourself with people that are like, go do it, run.
I love that. And I love the point you made about if you're, especially a younger person, you may not have these people in your circle today, but you don't physically have to know them, right? It could be through podcasts. One thing that helped me starting out was really going to meetups and RIAs because this was the only people that I got to meet who were actually investing in real estate who kind of gave me affirmation that I wasn't insane for thinking I could go out there and be an investor. Because to your point, you talk to your friends, family, all they see is risk. Why would you want to do that? Like, ooh, my cousin owned a real estate or my aunt owned a property and, those tenants tore her house up, right? Like, those are the stories you hear typically. You don't necessarily get that positive, confirmation that, yes, you're on the right path. So you have to surround yourself with those people, whether it be through podcasts, through physical events like meetups or RIAs. But you got to do that. And then from there, start looking up, okay, who's got the business that you can emulate? How do you get those mentors, the coaching that you necessarily need? And surrounding yourself so that you have that peer group. I really love that advice. Um, as you
It's a,
scale,
a little bit
yeah,
a
go
little
ahead.
bit sidetracked. I don't want you to get too sidetracked, but I really struggle to go to meetups. That's not my natural inclination.
Yeah.
I'm kind of I'll sit in the background, I'll watch what everybody's doing, I'll absorb it. But really, what am I accomplishing? I'm not accomplishing much. And so I have learned and continuing to relearn is, and then be intentional about it. If you go to an event, what is the outcome you want? Write it down. I'm going to meet 5 new people. I'm going to learn. And you'll find if you write it down and you're intentional about it, you're going to find what you're looking for. Back to you're going to get what you're looking for. And that's a hard thing for me because I'm not a natural just go into a crowd and have a great time and meet everybody new.
Yeah, Dale, and I think it's a good point, and I want to move on, but I launched my meetup, and I think it's really important. You talk about creating your peer group. The creation thing of it is so important too, because you kind of have to take the action. If you're just showing up, to your point, I mean, how many people show up to a meetup, listen to whatever speaker or whatever is going on, and then go home and it was either a waste of time or they didn't get anything out of it, and they only go to one, right? They don't go every month. When I started, I was going every month. So, I mean, looking around, the only person who went every other month was the host of the meetup. So I got to know that host really well. And again, by creating that peer circle, as that person started to succeed, I'm now asking better questions. Well, how'd you do that? You went from 3 units to 9 units. How'd you do that? So now I'm learning. I'm opening up my atmosphere to different strategies. I'm really considering different approaches, and that allowed me to kind of really scale and ultimately kind of do my own thing. So to your point, be very intentional about when you're attending events or connecting with people, but learning because that is really key. I want to kind of go back to something a bit more practical in your business, right? So as you were scaling, um, every investor, every business owner runs into challenges. as you were building up from, that 2000, 10, 11 time frame up to present day, what was the biggest challenge that you faced where you had to really work to overcome it?
Eh, Probably not the typical challenge, but for me, it's letting go.
Mm,
This is my baby. I do everything. I know
mm,
everything, and I've got to be involved in everything. And we're at a size of a company now that I just can't be involved in everything. It's just not realistic to be successful and have me involved in everything. And just as an entrepreneur, letting go of some of that control is probably the hardest thing for me. Hiring really good, competent people and let them do their job. With obviously you give some oversight, you create the vision, you work together. But if I'm managing every detail of the business, we just can't grow. And that really has been the hardest thing for me. It's my baby. I love my baby. I can't let my baby go. And having to learn to say, there's other people that can love my baby too and treat it well.
how did you get over it?
I'm still working on that.
So
I
it's there. You're still working on that
Yeah,
concept,
I'm
though.
significantly better than I've ever been. Part of it is just constantly reminding myself of, you've got really good people and having good, frank, open conversations. Because there's people on my team that'll challenge me. Say, do you really need to be doing that? Is that the best use of your time? Do you have somebody on your team that could do that? And so it's really being conscious of it and making sure those people around me are conscious of it, and then have the humility to be called out and say, yeah, you're right. I don't need to be doing that. I've hired some really, really smart people that, our CFO knows infinitely more about accounting than I will ever dream to know. And he's really good. So, asking questions and brainstorming, creating a vision together is really important. But how important it is that I'm really dive into the details. And so, it's really being conscious of it and making sure those around me are conscious of it. And then having the humility to recognize when you've gone too far and you need to back off and allow people to tell you that.
No, I love that. And I think anybody who's trying to scale a business needs to hear that and understand kind of that challenge of trusting your team, hiring the right people, but then empowering those people to make the right decisions. Let's talk about the business a little bit more, right? So many of our listeners are familiar with multifamily syndication. That's what we do in our business. You do real estate syndication as well, but you do it more with the single family development angle. Can you explain to our listeners more about kind of your business model and how it works?
And we think it's a little bit unique. Certainly, there are people out there doing it. We're just not familiar with those groups. So it's not too dissimilar from what you're doing with a multifamily, except for we're doing it on single family homes. So there's two components, and one is we're allowing people to invest alongside of us on for sale housing. And so it's people invest. We also do get institutional debt, and then we have investors that co-invest with us in the equity portion. And then we go in, we're developing the roads, we do all the entitlements, we design the houses, we sell the houses. And when it's a for sale product, they're sharing in the upside of that, the profit on those homes. And so, it's a little bit different than if you're buying an existing multifamily. An existing multifamily, hopefully you're getting dividends fairly quickly. Whereas for sale, you've got to be patient because it could be, by the time we get the entitlements, we develop the land, we build the first house, you could be a year before we see the first penny coming in. And so it's got to be more patient money. However, it also gives some really great returns that, they're looking at from year two to depending on how far the project is, whether it's just year two or does it go into year 5 or 6. And then we also, right now, we don't have any offerings, but build for rent. We see that there's a pretty big need build for rent. We own some apartments. We also own for rent housing. What's interesting is most of the people that live in our apartments all dream of owning a house one day. They're in the apartment. They're looking forward to eventually having enough money saved up, stability, whatever it is, to buy a house. The house renters, they're there because they want to rent. They do not want to, they don't want to buy, but they still want the yard for their dog. They still want the added privacy that may come with it, maybe more space, more bedrooms, office space. And so that's an interesting dynamic. And so we see that, there's a lot of companies that are doing build for rent communities, especially in the South and the West. Um, I mean, we're seeing it all over the country, but it's really dominated, Arizona and Texas and Florida and some of those markets where it's pretty hot. But we see opportunities in other places. What people want in Arizona is not too dissimilar than they want in the Midwest. And so we're working also on offering that, that gap that we see in the market.
Yeah, I think it's a great point there that, built for rent is definitely growing for residents, is growing in popularity. And one of the dynamics that's so interesting is the people who rent the homes, they're very happy being renters. Like they have the house. They don't need to technically own the debt and everything else that comes with it. They got the space, right? So they're happy being renters of a house versus those who rent in an apartment are typically looking to eventually buy a home. And we see that showing up as investors through the length of stay. So retention is much longer on our. We have townhomes. We don't have a built for rent community, but we do have townhomes. And even in our townhomes, those residents stay longer. They take care of the properties well. They do, some of the yard work. Like they really see this as their home, and they don't see it as a rental. And in apartments, like pretty much everybody sees it as a rental, but it's very interesting that dynamic and the psychology of the person who's renting when it's a house or a multi-level home that they're in as opposed to an apartment building. So I think that's really compelling and certainly something that we have to keep paying attention to as investors. You mentioned also on the build for sale side, so not build for rent, build for sale, which is going to be your typical housing development communities. You're putting up these, the roads, the everything that you need to build a community, and then you're selling those houses. Can you give us a little bit of context on like the typical time frame it takes to build those communities and talk about it from an investor standpoint, right? If someone's listening and they're like, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and I'd want to invest in that, like what do they need to know about the time frame of it and maybe some general parameters as far as what those return expectations look like from a broad range standpoint?
Yeah, so I'll use an example. We've got two, at the time of this recording, we've got two offerings right now. One is a phase two of a project. We've already done phase one. We already own the land. We're going to be putting in all the infrastructure, the roads. We already know the product that we're going to sell because we did it in phase one. And, all of our projects are pretty simple. We only offer 1 to 3 different house plans. We don't offer a lot of options. So it's all about efficiency. That project is 39 lots. And so we will, the roads, we'll be able to put those in and have that all done in about 90 days, start selling immediately, and then moving people in 6 months. So people will start to see return. So we'll do a preferred return of 8%. They'll start seeing that 8% preferred return on that particular project in about 8 months from the time that we start. And because it's only 39, typically our typical project, we want to be selling about 2+ a month. And in this project, we are doing about 2 a month. And so with only 39, we're about a year and a half that we're going to be close to be built out. So the person should see 100% of the return on their investment at about month 24. And in that particular one, the IRR we've got projected based on phase one is a 17.8 IRR with an 8% preferred return. And so that one's a little bit quicker. The other one that we have right now is just over 100 lots. It's similar in that we built in the same town, same product that we did about 40 units. And now we bought another piece of land that the city asked us. They owned it. They asked us to buy it and do a similar development. So it's about 100 lots. But because it's larger and we've got to do the development, that one's looking at more of about a 4.5 year return. And because of that, it's a little bit more patient money. That one I think performs, I believe it was 19.2 IRR with an 8% preferred return. And so, the goal is that we can have different investments for people depending on their needs. If somebody, hey, I don't want a long-term investment, 2 years is great, versus somebody, hey, I don't mind getting a little bit higher return and I can be patient with my money and wait that 4 to 5 years for them to build all and sell all 100 homes. Because we can build 100 homes really fast. It's about making sure we have buyers really fast. And
Yeah, can you
typically
talk
we'll
about that
price.
more? Just because I know you said you try to focus on 2 a month on the sales side. Can you elaborate why 2 a month?
Yeah, it's build for rent. It's how many can I rent a month? That's how many I want to build. So if I can rent 12 a month, well, 100 units I'm going to have done in a year. Uh, Whereas for sale, we're looking at it and saying, if I'm selling 10 a month, I'm probably priced too low and I'm leaving a whole lot of money on the table. And so we look at it and say, we want to do a minimum of two because of just efficiencies. If I've got a project manager that's managing a project that's only doing one a month, they're bouncing all over. Whereas two a month can keep a project manager busy. It can keep all of our trade partners efficient. So now we're getting better value from them. And so that's where our minimum, we want to be able to see two a month. Generally, we don't go over four a month in sales because our belief is generally if you're over four, you're leaving money on the table. And we want to get the best return for us and our investors as we can. And so that's where our sweet spot generally is that 2 to 4 a month. And so we'll perform things based on that minimum two. However, if we're selling 3 or 4 a month, we're thrilled. And if we're selling over four, we need to raise prices.
There you go. I love that. Thank you for that context. I think it helps people just understand how to think about the space. And again, if you like what you've heard and you want to talk to Dale more, you can reach out to Dale and his company at centracapitalpartners.com. Dale's also very active on LinkedIn. You can find him at Dale R. Wills on LinkedIn. Right now, we're going to transition to our round of insights. Dale, give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Yeah, a short period of time, I owned some Radio Shack franchises. This is back in the late 90s for a short period. And the 9/11 happened. And, it could be a very long story, but 9/11 happened and effectively we lost everything because people weren't spending money on retail. Radio Shack didn't have a whole lot of products that anybody needs. It's just a lot of wants. And that's what people give up first. As a result, we ended up having to file personal bankruptcy the next year after that. We just didn't survive it. We had the biggest franchise in the world. And so we bought inventory for that based on our sales, and we were sitting on all that inventory. The amazing lesson is it really showed to me the importance of understanding the finances. The language of business is accounting, and you've got to understand some basic accounting principles and really monitor that and track what you're doing, or you're going to set yourself up for failure. And that failure, not a perceived failure, that was a real failure. It was hard on my ego. It was hard on my pocketbook. It was hard on everything. But that failure really set me up for future success because now we really watch the numbers. We are really intimately involved in every number in the company and tracking what are the trends, what's going on, and what do we do to make sure we don't fail like that again.
Appreciate you sharing that. Give me the digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
The digital what?
Digital or mobile resource.
Digital
like an app. Yeah, like an app or anything you use on the phone to track information, track projects, anything like that.
We use a industry specific software. So if you're not in the building industry, then you don't use it. We love the software because it's cradle to grave. It helps us with tracking the development, the purchasing of the homes, the warranty, the sales. It does everything. And so we really love that. Another one we really like, it helps us organize ourselves as a business. Our meetings are ran off of it. It's called 90IO. And we use that to structure all of our meetings. It's how many meetings do you go to that's a total waste of time. We've all been to millions of those, but it tracks what are the to-dos that we're assigned, what are the issues that are important. And there's also a timer that tells you, are you on track or not? So you don't end up turning your 1 hour meeting into 3 hours talking about whatever happened this weekend. We love that one as well.
I appreciate that. All right, give me the book you recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
In the last year, I read 50 to 60 books a year, so that's always a tough question. I read a ton. I would say one that was really impactful for me, and we actually gave 100 of them away this last spring, it's Who Not How. Ben Hardy wrote it. It's based on Dan Sullivan's principles with Strategic Coach. And it just is a good reminder to me of make sure you have the right who's, and you'll be able to succeed, versus so often we focus on how do we get something accomplished? It's who do we need rather than how?
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Getting up with a routine every morning. I've got a specific routine. I get up in the morning. I do strength training. I then go sit in a sauna for a half an hour, and I do personal study. I plan my day, do some spiritual study, just time to think. Then I go do cardio for 45 minutes. While I'm cooling down from that, I look at my calendar, my emails, have the day planned out, and then I go. And when I do not do that, the days are not nearly as productive because I had no plan.
Yeah, great tips there. All right, give me your number one insight for building for sale or for rent. Let's just say for new development.
The number one insight, you've got to stay agile. Know what's going on in the market. We have a long cycle when we build, and if you're behind just a little bit, you're in big trouble. So make sure you're watching what's happening in the market, and make sure that you're okay with the downside. And if you're not okay with the downside, don't do it.
All right, great tips there. Let's lighten the mood, right? So, where are you located again? You're in Minnesota. What part of Minnesota?
We're in the Minneapolis area.
Minneapolis. All right, so you're based in Minneapolis. Give us your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Okay, home. My wife is the best cook ever.
I love
We
it.
really love when we go out. We go out mostly to give my wife a break because she just doesn't like to cook every day. She loves to cook and she's good at it. We love Indian food. We really enjoy the variety and the flavor, and so we're always, our date nights will consist of, let's open up Google or Yelp and say, what's a new restaurant that has a high rating that we've never tried?
I love it. Great stuff there. Yeah, well, I love it, man. Home seems like the right place to be for cooking in your place. But Dale, you gave us a lot of great stuff, talking about your background in the banking industry and development, how that allowed you to launch Centra Companies, really giving us some great little tidbits on getting started, working with the banks and finding the opportunities, partnering with them, and how that allowed you to really launch and scale this business. Talking a little bit about what to look out for, how to be agile, the way you look at the disposition in your business plan, and how important the accounting is and the numbers, just making sure that you're being smart and savvy and really understanding the business. Again, if folks want to learn more about your company or you, they can connect with you on LinkedIn. Dale R. Wills is your handle on LinkedIn. And then also your company is centracapitalpartners.com. Dale, thanks again for coming on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.